everyone, my name is Eímear Noone. I'm a composer and conductor, and welcome to Future Human. So I have used this opportunity to find out where my colleagues are in terms of their adoption of technology inside of this new world that we found ourselves in. Performers that are particularly used to working in acoustic ensembles like the orchestra, and how they have acquired a new knowledge and a new friendship and a new comfort with technology in order to continue to express themselves musically, to continue to share their music with their audience. But most interestingly, where the limitations of our current time are taking us, how our adoption of technology in the orchestral world has been accelerated. These are existing technologies that have been around for a while, but there's been a shifting attitude and a mind opening out of pure necessity. One of the things that are built into the musical training is resilience. Musicians are some of the most resilient people I know. And from the earliest days of building a career, you're constantly thinking about what's coming next, and constantly adapting to your environment. And to quote Simon Webb of the BBC Philharmonic, musicians are choosing to express themselves through technology in the midst of this pandemic. You can't stop being a musician because you're on lockdown. That's not who we are. Every molecule of us is a music-making molecule. So we start to shift our creativity in ways that can help us to continue to be who we are and do what we do. So I've spoken with some orchestra executives from the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, from the BBC Concert Orchestra, from the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, to find out what they're doing to innovate, how they're coping with the situation, but interestingly, how when things hopefully quickly return to normal, how we can bring everything we've learned and this accelerated adoption of technology to the next level when we can combine the traditional live space and the traditional live environment with the digital capabilities with which we've become so comfortable out of necessity. I spoke to Dr. Jane Donald. She's Director of External Relations for the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, and her colleague Kat Mckenzie, about how they've been working through these issues and how they've been coping, but how they've been creating. The other amazing thing that's coming out of this is a different way of interacting with audience and a way of opening up to a greater audience. My wish for the future would be to send out an email to my friends and say, hey guys, meet me in my virtual green room and let's go and hear Schoenberg with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, or let's go to Dublin virtually for the RTE National Symphony Orchestra of Ireland and hear some Beethoven. I learned so much through working with the video game music community, how that audience expects to consume content very unromantically. That's a very unromantic description, but how they interact with pop culture and with culture. They taught me a lot. They taught me about the concert experience. It's not just the music, it's being there with family, with friends, it's being in the moment together, it's experiencing this moment. But another really fun thing, which is letting your freak flag fly, just completely geeking out at whatever it is that is your jam. Be that video game music, the Beatles, Schoenberg, earlier Renaissance choral music, whatever is your jam, that you can meet someone from the other side of the world who's got a completely different cultural background to you, and you can nerd out at the same time in the same space about the same thing. That's one of the things I love about MMOs, which are massive multiplayer online games. You can get together in a guild or on a team with your friends from the other corner of the earth who've got a different religion, different background. There are no barriers, there are no limits. And also friends who are differently abled can have as immersive an experience as anyone else. They can contribute as much as anyone else. It's an incredibly democratizing situation as well. I love that for classical music in particular. I love how that opens up that whole world to the world. And it's no longer just constantly, elitism is falling at our feet in this democratization of content. And so my dream would be to say, hey guys, let's meet in my virtual green room. Let's have a chat beforehand. Let's hang out. And then let's attend a live concert. And in the intermission, let's meet again. We'll have a chat. We meet each other virtually. And, you know, it's not the same experience as a live experience. It's a completely different way of interacting with music. However, when you have the option going forward into our future, we'll have the option of doing one, doing the other, or a combination of the two, as you'll see later on when I'm talking to Simon Webb of the BBC Philharmonic, how they're using a web app to allow the audience to interact with the musicians and interact with each other. So this is my little quest, is to find out how my fellow musicians are doing, what they're doing, how they're adapting, how they're innovating, and how we're moving forward, and what we're going to ultimately, what we can learn from this, and what we can bring to the future to create something that otherwise we either may never have thought of, or would have taken us a lot longer to get to. Composers, one of the things we know is welcome limitations, because there's nothing scarier than the blank page. But when there are things that you cannot do, that you're limited to, we embrace those because they make your creativity different. You're creating a different way inside of those limitations than you would have were they not there. And it's really fun for me to look and see what my colleagues are doing with these limitations and how they're being compelled to create outside the box, strangely enough, to create inside the box. So first, I'd like to go and take you to talk to my colleagues at the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, Dr. Jane Donald and Kat Mckenzie. Jane, could you give us a little rundown on how you and your team have been embracing these challenges and limitations, and how you've kept the orchestra playing and you've kept the audience being fulfilled by your wonderful performances?
Yes, of course. Thank you. It's great to be here and speak to you. I think the first thing to say is that yes, this is a challenging time for orchestras right around the world, for arts organisations, particularly for concert halls and concert venues. To give some Scottish context, here in Scotland, we can't perform live to audiences at all at the moment. So we're completely reliant on what we can do digitally. That's slightly different from the rest of the UK. And of course, when this period of time started, when we first went into lockdown, this was the single longest period of time that our musicians have ever not been together. We're 130 years old, and this is the longest they've ever been apart. So of course that was very challenging, but we were also fortunate that we have a small digital team in place, and we did do before lockdown. And that team had started, it was really experimental, it wasn't really meant for broadcast, had started capturing concerts, had started really getting content, which we all know that, you know, quality content is the basis for what we're all trying to do. So we started a series called the Friday Night Club really very fast after lockdown. And that content was completely free. We started to engage our existing audiences, and I think this is something that's quite interesting for us. Our audiences weren't particularly digitally literate, so we spent quite a lot of time on the phone, showing them how to cast YouTube to their televisions. We ran bars and events after the concerts in Zoom where they could meet the musicians and talk to them. So we actually found it was quite nice. Some of our audiences were teaching other members of their audience how to use Zoom, and then they weren't just using it for concert going, they were then using it to contact their friends and their families. So we felt that it had a bit of a social purpose beyond just the concert. I think that that's really, you know, it's been a really quite a difficult time, as you say, but it's also been quite an enabling time, because in a lot of ways the ways we've worked digitally have accelerated, but also our existing audiences' ability and comfort with digital technologies has also accelerated.
Everybody's become so comfortable with Zoom that, yes, it's an amazing opportunity for audiences to have that concert experience where, I mean, part of the fun of attending a concert is going with your friends and discussing what's going on, and meeting the performers is really, really wonderful. And, you know, it's amazing for me, having worked in the world of video game music, and with that particular audience, having seen this inside of video games, and it's now coming into the world, into the world at large, you know, going with your friends from across the world to see the Royal Scottish National Orchestra digitally, meeting the performers digitally, and interacting with your fellow concert goers. I mean, that's really, really fun. And going forward, I mean, where do you see this type of innovation once we come back to normal? Now, I'm talking to you from Dublin, and at this moment in time in Ireland, our orchestras can't even be together. You know, they can't be together physically at all. We're at stage 5 lockdown. We can't, you know, enter each other's homes, and we must stay within 5 kilometers and all of this kind of thing. But where do you see, once things come back to, let's call it a new normal, how do you see these two worlds of the traditional live situation coming together with digital, and each one adding to the other?
I mean, I think our audience is already giving us some clues about what they want from that. So I don't think there's anybody of any age or stage who isn't desperate to get some kind of live engagement again. I don't think, sometimes it's characterized as young people are comfortable with technology and they'd be quite happy to do everything digitally. I think that's a fallacy. I talk to our youth advisory board quite regularly, and they really want to meet each other in person as well as on Zoom. So I think across the generations, there's a real thirst for live performance again. But to answer your question, I think that what people are getting now is something different. And if we do it cleverly, I think they'll end up wanting both. They'll want the live performance, but they'll also want this experience they've now invested in of being able to see the musician's hands up close, being able to see the conductor's expression, being able to go back and listen to a particular passage of music again and again. So, you know, being able to find ways to connect with the composer who's across the world in the bar. You know, so I think these are, I think what we'll go from is, pre-pandemic, we had a kind of a live, mainly live model in most Western orchestras. Those of us who've decided to really, you know, innovate, we've gone completely digital. I think there has to be a blended moment. I'm hoping for that blended moment that comes when we can enjoy both live and digital together. So I think that's certainly where, as an orchestra, we'd be heading.
So I'm going to ask Kat a question for you, and that is, you've been hearing from audience, and can you tell me some of the things that you've heard from the audience in terms of how they're interacting with technology, how they feel about how the orchestra is presenting work in this format, and any madcap ideas that are being thrown at you from audience members?
Yes, well, it has been absolutely lovely, because I think, you know, when I think back to March and what was happening then, it's quite easy now to look at this year and the kind of past 6 months as if it's been a period of time, but we didn't know this was going to be a period of time in March. We thought we were cancelling concerts for a few weeks, and, you know, we're really kind of playing a lot by ear, like everyone was all over the world. So when we first put our initial offering, as James mentioned, were these kind of re-edited, remastered concerts, which were online for free. And it was actually quite an emotional experience, because we would sit with our audience on a Friday night, reading the comments on Facebook, reading the comments on YouTube, talking to them, responding to them. But it was incredibly emotional because you would have people reuniting in the comments section of our Facebook page and saying, you know, oh, hi, Jane, I've not seen you for years. And oh, hi, Kat, oh my gosh, how are you? And it was such a light and such a sense of optimism at a time when you weren't allowed to do anything and there were no shops open and we had no idea when concerts were coming back. So from the get-go, this was hugely motivating. And something that's incredible is just our concert on Friday night, we had viewers from the UK, the USA, Canada, Germany, Switzerland, New Zealand, Australia, and lots of other countries. Those were the kind of top countries. So it's incredible to think, what's this going to lead to? Will people one day think, oh, when we go on holiday to Scotland, we must go see the RSNO, you know, we watch them in lockdown and things. And it's been incredible because I think for us, it's certainly brought home just how important music is and just how important it is to use these technologies to their utmost potential to bring people together in any way we can at the moment.
So Jane and Kat gave us a great idea of what's happening in Scotland. However, their positivity, their inspirational thinking, that's quite typical of what I'm experiencing with orchestras around the world at the moment. There's everybody, it's all hands on deck. Everybody's getting in, everybody's contributing, and everybody has that adaptability and resilience. It's hard, but it's part of what we do anyway. However, it's in extremis right now. I also got to speak with Andrew Connelly of the BBC Concert Orchestra. And of course, being the BBC Orchestra, they are a broadcasting orchestra, so they're constantly broadcasting to audience anyway. So it's not unusual for them to be filming concerts and things like that. But one of the things I spoke to Andrew about was how the individual musicians were embracing technology personally. And he said between lockdown, within the first 3 weeks of lockdown, the uptake of recording software and use of microphones, recording techniques for the players, the average was 2 to 3 weeks, and that's absolutely astonishing. That when the musicians, and this was something that was self-motivated. I also heard this from BBC Philharmonic, self-motivated by the musicians, that everybody all of a sudden started to adopt recording software and miking techniques. And it's a very complex area. Normally when we go to work, you have a team of specialists there because recording orchestral instruments is incredibly complex. And you require not just someone who's a fantastic recording engineer, but an actual specialist in recording orchestras. It doesn't surprise me to hear this of my colleagues in Dublin here. We have seen this very, very quickly. I saw it. One of the things that happened in our world is in the middle of recording a 90-minute film score for an animated feature, we got locked down on. So we had to half a fully live score, and the other half was a combination of individual players and hybrid techniques, so existing samples and so on. However, we saw the curve of uptake and who was available, who was able to record themselves and send us the files, how quickly that happened from 0 not to 40 within the space of a couple of weeks. So this is indicative of what's happening all over the world. It doesn't surprise me to hear my UK colleagues saying the same, which takes me to the other thing that this quick uptake in technology has led to, and that's the BBC Concert Orchestra's project involving diversification, education, outreach. They're really starting a new project to use the techniques that they have gained through this period to reach a very diverse group, and that's fantastic news. So now I'd like to take you to Simon Webb, Director of the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra. I'm here with Simon Webb from BBC Philharmonic. Simon, thank you so much for joining Future Human and giving us an insight into working with the orchestra in this incredibly unusual environment in which we find ourselves. So I want to jump right straight in. I'm not even letting you say hello. Jump straight in and ask you about the orchestra's relationship with technology in the age of COVID, how it has changed and where you think it's going to take you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Here being my son's bedroom in my house in Sheffield, but still, it's good to be joining you on this call. Look, the first thing to say is the orchestra, the musicians of the orchestra adapted unbelievably quickly. And that was a huge lesson for me as their director, seeing what happened there. I think the hardest thing for a musician in this situation, I'm sure, is that our very existence is all about, our sort of identity is all about being together and responding to each other in real time, and that sort of inexplicable synergy that you get when you have two or more musicians together making music, and you can't define it, we shouldn't try to analyze it, it's just what musicians are, what musicians do. And to have that snatched away literally overnight, we were rehearsing on a Monday and then decided we couldn't come to work on a Tuesday, so that broadcast never happened. And that's unbelievably tough for a musician. What then happened at the BBC Philharmonic was that the musicians, and I have to be clear about this, because in the first instance I tried to stop it, the musicians decided that they were going to start recording together remotely from home. And one of the musicians created an orchestration of an Irving Berlin song. The musicians found a way of recording their own sound, bringing it together, and they brought in a freelance sound producer to make the audio. This was at a point when the management team were so completely under the cosh, we didn't know what was going on. We were just desperately trying to work out how to get from one day to the next. And then they presented us within 2 or 3 weeks of lockdown, within 2 weeks, I think, they presented us with a recording of an Irving Berlin song, which was then played out on 3 national stations in the UK over 2 days. And it was the most chastening moment for me as a manager, but also as having once been a musician. You're always a musician, once a musician, always a musician, but I'm working as a manager. And to see that my musicians had this totally irrepressible need to be musicians was a really important lesson, I suppose. It was quite hard because we didn't have the capacity to service this as a management team, and the musicians just got on with it. But what an extraordinary thing. They taught themselves the technology and how to do this. What we then did was create the environment for that to happen repeatedly over and over again. So the musicians learned, and we did all the kind of research into the best ways of creating the best sound, the best ways of stitching this together as an editorial process, lots of advice about which microphones to use, how to film, all these sort of things. And over the period of probably a month or so, we very rapidly helped our musicians to build that skill set. But I have to be clear that it was the musicians who did this. It wasn't some management-led initiative. It was musicians who needed to be musicians. And what the extraordinary thing is for me about musicians, and it took me right back to my days as a musician and just trying to make ends meet and working out how on earth you were going to earn enough money to get through the next week. And that was genuine. Well, it was the beginning of a career. It's often like that for us musicians, isn't it? And what I saw here was that same hunger, that same desire to work, but it was expressed because of lockdown. It was expressed as an embracing of technology.
Digital concert halls, virtual concerts, meeting audience members online before and after the concert, interacting with the musicians. These are all technologies that aren't new. However, what is new and exciting is the wholesale adoption of these technologies and the accelerated adoption of these technologies in the orchestral and the performing world. What's also exciting is a sort of a headspace shift for artists and musicians who are used to dealing with our old technology and perfect instruments that are the height of their own version of analog technology, and taking what we're learning, putting these two together and being able to express ourselves in a new way that we may have been a little reluctant to embrace in the past. So in conclusion, I excited and inspired by my colleagues and by their positivity, their innovation, their ambition, and their incredible resilience. And it seems to me that the future of performance in both the digital realm and when we're back to our new normal in the live realm, I can see both of those having a legitimate place in our cultural experience, and then wonderful crossovers happening in terms of real-time interaction inside of the live space, both digitally and physically in person. So thank you to the Future Human audience for taking a look at our orchestral world in this new advancing digital age.